going to open almost immediately to audience questions, but I have one that I want to just throw to the panel to start with, leading off really from Umair's comments and your own. Clearly we're talking about people and organizations, but people for the most part work in organizations, even quite small organizations. I looked at the list of the participants here today, and at least 100 work for what I would categorize as big organizations. So we take JP Morgan from Umair's example. Obviously, it's an institution that lots of people from outside feel shouldn't exist or shouldn't exist in that form, but it employs 260,000 people, many of whom rely on it. How do we get from the transition from the organizations we have today to the organizations of tomorrow how do we do it humanely, is my question. Fredmund, you've worked with big organizations and seemingly managed these transitions. How does it happen? All of you have talked in different ways about the pain of transformation. Can it be done with minimal pain?
I think you can, yes, and in some instances it has already been done. It is a new development, it is an innovation, but with 600 cases, as I said, we are quite certain that it can be done, and therefore I think it will be done. Now, it would go into the question of, are there organizations which are ethically justifiable or so? But I think if I put that away for the moment, I mean, this is another question. I think we can do it with minimizing pain, not without any pain, of course, but with minimizing it. And what I am experiencing is that there are no devilishly people within the organizations trying to do whatever sad or bad things with the world, but they are looking for tools who enable them to go about these changes. As long as they do not have such tools, they cannot do anything else but that we did in the past. But with new tools, they can do it in a much more humanely way.
John, you talked about the ability of, you're not opposed to the idea of the big corporation, but you think it needs to change. Again, can this be done? People cling to these institutions. We can't rule out human nature in saying, I've got to hang on to what I've got.
No, I think it's one of the biggest challenges we face. I've been involved in organizational transformation initiatives for more than 30 years. I only have one lesson to share from all that experience. And that is, if you think organizational transformation is a rational process, you have lost. If you think that all you have to do is do all the analysis, get the data, put it on charts, share it with everybody, and mobilize everyone forward, you've lost. The one lesson I have is organizational transformation ultimately is a profoundly political process. The only thing that matters in organizational transformation is finding ways to identify and neutralize the enemies of change, and there are enemies of change, the ones who have power today, and to identify and strengthen the champions of change. And as long as possible, I'm a big fan of the art of war. If you have to engage in direct conflict with the enemy, direct battle with the enemy, you've lost the war. The antibodies within or institutions today are extremely powerful, and they will do everything possible to crush change. So I think the only way to do this is through a political process that involves what we call scaling edges, and we've written a lot about this if you're interested, but it has to do with leveraging some of the new technologies that are available and the accelerating change that's going on to be able to take edges that can scale very rapidly and over time pull more and more of the people and resources from the core out into the edge without ever directly challenging the core.
Over time is an interesting point, Tim, because you talked about the evolution. And do we just have to wait for this to happen, and discover that we've evolved, these new organizations have evolved? How far can this pace be forced?
Well, I mean, to continue the biological analogy, I think we're discovering now that evolution can actually move very quickly if the external circumstances create enough pressure for change. And, we've talked a lot already today about how fast the external pressures are changing, and therefore, it would seem reasonable to expect change to happen faster because of that. And I don't think we have to wait very long. I think we're seeing relatively large-scale new kinds of institutions, if you like, that are showing a sense of purpose and a sense of meaning that at least set the example for how others might change, and that varies from the latest tech companies like a Facebook or a Google to organizations like the Gates Foundation, which I think is a good example of a large-scale institution that has an enormous sense of purpose and is attracting enormous amounts of talent because of that sense of purpose. And the more examples we have, my experience has always been that change is always easier if you can point to something and say, I want to be like that. If you can aspire to something, very much harder when there are no examples in the world. And as we grow the number of examples in the world of new kinds of institutions that have combined adaptability and innovation and creativity with passion and meaning, the more of those we have, the more other organizations and the individuals within those organizations will aspire to emulate them.
Okay, well, we'll come back to whether JP Morgan can turn into the Gates Foundation and how long that will take. Now, I want to gather some questions. We're going to do this, unlike previous sessions, by taking perhaps a couple, 2 or 3 questions. Gentlemen at the front here, and then I'll bring them back to the panel.
Great.
Could you say who you are and who you represent? That would be useful.
Ben Ramalingam. I'm the author of a book, Aid on the Edge of Chaos, which applies complex systems thinking to international development. You all talked very eloquently, if I can summarize, about essentially managing complexity being an area where the craft and art of management need to come together with a different understanding of the science of the world that we face and our values. And I guess my question is really about the science bit of that. How do we make sure we actually learn from this emerging science of complexity and not just turn some key words into a whole new era of management jargon and gobbledygook?
Okay, the fight against management jargon, the constant fight against management jargon. Yes, a lady in red here in about 7 rows back.
You talked about learning organizations.
Sorry, could you just say who you are and who you represent? Thank you.
Eva Bittaker, Scrum.org. You talked about learning organizations and harnessing the power and the knowledge of networks that organizations build. Can you talk about how companies that you've worked with have done that? How do they facilitate the knowledge exchange in their networks?
Okay, and we'll just take one more. 2nd row here, gentleman with the microphone, always useful.
Andreas Vondran, it's from Vogedo. It's a 94 years old housing cooperative. I would like to stick some more on this question about how to reach those people in the institutions, the enemies of the change, you called it. Maybe to Professor Malik, because I think most people there are not even have the readiness to thinking about integration or rethinking what they're doing. So how to cope with them, because I think you might know the common word that they say, usually they prefer to shoot the messenger.
Okay, so your question is, how to reach those people. So let's take those last 2 questions together first. I mean, companies, how they facilitate the knowledge exchange and how to reach most people in institutions who may not be ready. I'll start with Tim this time, just to come back from that end.
I don't know that I have lots to add in terms of what other organizations do. I do know that in our own experience, inside our relatively small organization, that what we see is extremely strong social networks going on within our organization. Of people know and help each other all of the time, and in order for that to happen, you have to give them the freedom to figure out to reprioritize what it is that they're doing. So just in the way that perhaps a Google gives 15% time to its engineers to work on whatever they like, what I prefer to do is to suppose that every individual within the organization can reprioritize what they do in order to help others around them that need the help at any given moment. So the organization's constantly reprioritizing. But that's based on these incredibly strong social networks that exist. And I've got to imagine that if you went into any organization and measured the kind of that internal and external connectivity, that the more interconnected an organization is, the better chance you have both for the kind of scalable learning that John was talking about and the readiness for change, because ideas migrate around the organization so much faster. And so a big part of the transformation that has to go on within institutions is as much the way in which we structure the flows of information as it is anything else.
Yes, the interesting thing about that is, of course, from your charts, the networked organization is more complex looking than the
Absolutely.
all trains through Paris version, but actually it is a way of combating complexity. Is that how you see it, John?
Yeah, there's a great example that I think illustrates some of the opportunity and also this notion of scaling edges, which is with a company that I think most of you are familiar with called SAP in the software business. The founder of SAP, Hasso Plattner, who's a classic entrepreneur, as SAP grew bigger and bigger, became more and more concerned about the siloed, bureaucratic, not invented here culture that was emerging. And so what he did was he hired somebody, brought somebody in from the outside and put him in charge of a new part of the business. And he said, look, I want you to do things differently there. And what he did was he created a platform and didn't try to attract the employees of SAP. They went out and attracted the application developers from their third-party channels, from their customers, and they just created a simple environment where if you were an application developer running into a problem, you could post a question, see if anybody else had an idea on how to solve the problem. Long story short, that platform was hugely successful. It now has over 2 million participants worldwide. The average time to answering a question satisfactorily on that platform is 17 minutes, and it's diminishing as more and more people join. What happened was word spread to the developers within SAP that if you wanted to become much more productive in application development, you better get out on this platform because that's where you get answers to your questions. And over time, he pulled more and more of the SAP developers out there. So it was a very interesting way of creating a platform to accelerate learning. The other just quick thing on this was another brilliant thing they did was design reputation profiles so that if you contributed a successful answer to a problem, you not only got points, but points in a specific area of expertise. That became a huge magnet to draw application developers together around shared expertise and start conversations, build relationships. Now there are entire teams forming on this platform, worldwide, global teams that have never met each other in physical space, but developing new applications as a result of the relationships they've built on this platform.
And that clearly goes to the knowledge sharing point. Fredmund, what about the persuading employees who aren't ready, the lack of readiness internally? It's a bit like my first question, but...
I mean, after some decades of working with people in business, but not only there, also in politics, administration, etc., my estimation is that about 2/3 of the people do want to change. They seize the opportunity, they want to get better, they want to have organizations which are doing better jobs, using less resources, etc., etc. Maybe there is 1/3 who don't. Okay, so I try to identify those who want and run with them. And I do not much care with the others. See, that's my strategy, so to speak. Counting on the fact that the good example will work for its own. It will convince people that it is possible to do it in a peaceful, in a non-violent, and in a more or less, not, as I said, not without any sacrifices, but with minimizing them. And I think this is the best thing you can do. There may be all sorts of conspiracies out there. People like to or do not like to change, but I do not care that much about them at the present moment. See?
And so to come to the first question that was posed on the science of complexity, how do we learn from that without sinking into jargon? I'm a little bit worried about syntegration, frankly, myself, but as a word, I can see the concept. But
this is a very, very important question, as said, because one system which is very, very resistant to change is academia, actually. You see, so the university, I mean, among us, we might say that, and I know that Peter Drucker was quite of the same opinion, no? Wasn't he? So I had a discussion even in January of 2005 with him when I visited him last on syntegration and change and in the academic field, etc. Yes, so it is a pity that the sciences of complexity so far are very rarely taught, educated on systematically. So there are people who are interested in it, they learn it by themselves, and they just do it. But in the official courses and so on, business administration, I'm not aware. I mean, we did a lot of things in St. Gallen, and Peter Gomez and myself, we have, I think, done some pioneering work together with others. But then there are also, again, resistances and all the things, and in the academic field, they can survive. All the resistances can survive in the academic field in some niches. In the business schools, and I hope that this is that the Peter Drucker Foundation can do something about that, but there is very, very little education about holistic thinking, about the cybernetics, for instance, in technology. Cybernetics is all about there, the driver assistance systems in the car, aircraft, etc., etc. In technology, there is no resistance at all. But in the world of our organizations and in academia, in that field, very much so. Yeah,
it is a strong sub-theme of this conference already and others that I've been to, that the business schools are failing to meet the challenge of complexity. Let me take another cluster of 2 or 3 questions.
But even they probably, even they, if they see it is possible, and there are tools which with which it is possible, maybe they are changing their minds.
Okay. Yeah.
I have a different question regarding our environment. We have seen the rise of unions decades ago, which was very important at the time to improve the position of the workers. Today, could it be that what we see, what happened with JP Morgan, for example, be it good or be it bad, and it always has both sides, that we have new unions, so to say, which are global and which try to improve the state of the world or the position of many more people in the world?
Okay. Another question. Can we take another one for this cluster, or we can tackle that one? Yes, over there, sir.
Thank you. David Pearl from the Worldwide Hospice Palliative Care Alliance. I run an umbrella body in the UK for my day job, has a lot of young people who are very nervous about too much freedom of thought. And we can talk about becoming a learning organization, changing the way we design, we think, and they think, oh my goodness, the chief exec's wanting us to take more responsibility. And it seems as though we need to work on mindset change. And I'm just wondering what experience or ideas you would have about helping change people's ways they see reality and therefore approach their working lives.
Okay, we'll start with those two. The question of new unions. Okay, that's an interesting. I feel the gaze of Franz Josef on the back of my neck on this one. Can we get the kind of is there a need for this to have a name? And we've heard Don Tapscott talking about the 10 taxonomies of networks. Tim.
I was just going to make the point that I thought Don did a very eloquent job of describing what the new unions might be, which are these global networks, which have, because of the transparency and visibility that technology gives at least more of today, assuming we fight to retain that transparency, then it's possible for these networks to act in some of the same ways that perhaps unions traditionally acted, which was to articulate the needs of those disadvantaged within a system and make it difficult for those in control of the system to necessarily get their own way all the time. I mean, I think that's really the value that unions brought in the 19th and early 20th century. And I think where they started to go wrong is where they started to represent a constituency in a sort of almost a political sense, and then you ended up with all kinds of kind of unfortunate outcomes. I think the notion that networks that are able to increase transparency, represent underrepresented ideas, and make it very difficult for those who theoretically empowered to behave however they want. That's the value that's what we need, and I think that's what some of these systems might deliver for us.
Yes, John.
I think the question on unions is an interesting one. When I talked about institutions, I was speaking mainly about companies. I believe all institutions today are driven by scalable efficiency, including unions. It's all about predictability and protecting what you have today versus this model of scalable learning. There's a billboard that was up in Silicon Valley for a long time. I don't know if it's still there, but the billboard simply said, "How does it feel to know there are at least 1 million people around the world who can do your job?" Kind of focuses the mind. And one of the things that it, I think, drives towards is a notion that you cannot be complacent. No matter what skills, no matter what credentials, no matter what accomplishments you have, there are 1 million people around the world who can do your job. If you're not getting better faster, you're going to lose that position. And I think the role for unions over time, if we move to scalable learning, is basically the role that guilds used to play, which is to help people learn faster. And that's an interesting, different model than the unions that we have today.
So that actually moves quite easily into the second question about mindset change. These networks provide a support for this element of change? I mean, is that sufficient for people who are afraid about the freedom of thought? Can a community, a global community, offer anything like that protection for people?
I don't think it's enough on its own. I mean, it certainly helps, but one of the things that one of the things that prevents change is fear. You've just described it, and the best kind of antidote to deal with that kind of fear and to encourage change is based on, I think, the work done by Albert Bandura at Stanford over many years. And he talks about this idea of guided mastery, that actually change in a kind of fear-based environment happens one small step at a time. And people generally need help with each of those steps, which is why it's called a guided mastery, not learned mastery or taught mastery, but and so that the notion that we need networks around us not only give us information, but actually help us through whatever each of these steps might be. So, I mean, when we're trying to teach people to give them creative confidence so that they in themselves sort of unlock whatever creativity they might have within them, it's all about them trying it time and time and time again, doing something a little bit more complicated each time, so that eventually they master these steps. And so I actually believe that, John just mentioned guilds, but that many of the ideas of that we had kind of pre-industrial revolution around apprenticeships and craftsmanship and mastery are going to be important again.
Right.
That we'll each need to go on perhaps many journeys of mastery over our working lives, and we will need help from those around us to do it.
Fredmund, any thoughts on that?
I would not like to. First of all, the unions in different countries are very, very different. See, the US unions are totally different from the Germans, and the French are totally different from all of them, etc. And I'm most familiar with the Germans one, and executives of the unions are very much prepared and positive to change. They know they have to change. They have lost membership, of course, by the millions almost. They have to do something. On the other hand, even in Germany, but less so than in other countries, the owners, the shareholders, and the executives from the shareholder side, they made it very, very difficult, by following the shareholder approach very one-sidedly for the unions to do a decent job. Because if we establish confronting atmospheres in the boardrooms, it will not work. One cannot do anything against the unions in Germany, but what one can do a lot with them. And here in this house, in the 87, late 80s, when the nationalized industry of Austria collapsed, by that time I invented Peter Drucker to give a lecture here in order to tell those executives about his thinking. I was involved as a consultant in that time, and it was absolutely impossible to do it against the unions. But the unions as such are not a block. There was Mr. So-and-so and Mr. So-and-so, and with those people, if we were able to identify them, we could really do something about it, and a lot positive things were done. And then think of all the family companies, the large family companies, 40,000 people, 60,000 people in Germany, for instance, they have unions too. And there is a very good collaborative basis with them. And in Switzerland, we do have, the unions are quite unimportant, but in every company you have representatives, a commission or something like that of the workers, and one can collaborate with them very, very well. If one respects them, if one gains their trust, I mean, that's important. They have to have even more information than the shareholder representatives, and then it works quite well. I'm not sure whether the German industry, for instance, the economy, would be any better without the unions.
Right. Thank you, Fredmund. Ume has tweeted that if you want to change people's reality, change people's truths, send a CEO to an orphanage for 3 months and see what happens. So I'll put that to the next CEO I meet. Now, more questions from the floor. I'm sure there'll be lots. Yes, the gentleman here near the camera. Sorry, it's coming from your left, sir.
I'm Edmund Kwok from Hong Kong, the Executive Vice President of China Peter Drucker Academy. I'm very much encouraged by the presentation of the 3 speakers present here. That's exactly the kind of direction that we are now moving, both in mainland China and also Hong Kong. One of the comments that I have is that I guess except Mr. Malik, and a point mentioning about Li and Feng, there is almost nothing mentioned in the other part of the world in Asia. What kind of situation that we are talking about in a different intercultural context. So the question that I would like to put up is, what if the relationship that we are talking about, the relationship between the state and the civil society, what if the situation like in China, the state is so powerful, yet the civil society is weak? How are we going to consider this kind of new strategy? Different kind of strategy, including networking, including a creator economy, and the strategy that the 3 distinguished speakers have presented. How should we deal with this kind of different political context or political social context?
Can I just ask a question back to you? Do you think civic society is as weak? It's publicly weak, but behind the scenes, it's networked in ways that we're only just beginning to learn about, which seems quite powerful to me.
It's a controlled society.
Yeah.
Okay. Even the social media is controlled.
Okay. Another question. Yes, over here on John and behind there. Yeah.
Yeah. John Elvidge, Edinburgh Airport. I just wanted to pick up on the very interesting thought that Tim was voicing at the end of the last round of questions about reaching back into some of our older experience to find things that we can adapt as tools in the context of the new circumstances that we're discussing. And I just wondered if people had other thoughts about things from our past that we might redeploy in that way? Because in my own experience of change in organizations, one of the things that people who are being asked to change want to know is what elements of their past knowledge they can bring with them into the change.
Right, it might be reassuring, in other words, in some ways, to say there is part of what you already know that you could use. Okay, we'll come to that. We'll have to just take a third one. It's Rick here. Come to you in the next round, sir.
Great, thanks. Hi, Rick Wartzman from the Drucker Institute. It seems to me that this idea of scalable learning organizations creates tremendous opportunity, moving from a consumer economy to a creative economy is wonderful and creates all kinds of opportunities for those who are in position to take advantage of these things. But there are many who don't have access to basic educational levels, won't be knowledge workers, and are getting left further and further behind. So I'm wondering, do you think that these trends you're talking about, do they help alleviate income inequality and this growing divide that we see, or will they end up exacerbating that trend?
Okay, so three rather different questions, but John, you mentioned Li and Feng, and obviously you were extolling China and the way in which it's changing and adapting, but there is the elephant in the room of the Chinese state, which is clearly overseeing everything, including social networks.
Well, when I was talking about China, I was not talking about the state. I was talking about the entrepreneurial sector of China, as well as
can the entrepreneurial sector change the overarching institution?
I come from Silicon Valley. I'm ultimately an optimist, so I believe over time change will happen. I think in Mao's terms, there is a contradiction in China that needs resolution, and the question is which side is going to win? Will it be the state or will it be the entrepreneurial sector of the economy? Again, I'd like to believe that the entrepreneurial sector will ultimately prevail and lead to a decentralization of political power.
Okay. Anyone else like to answer on the China point?
I'm certainly seeing a growth in social entrepreneurship in China, and so the kind of combination, if you like, of the civic society and entrepreneurial society coming together in quite surprising ways. Some of it very high profile, from kind of relatively well-known individuals that are beginning to turn towards social issues, and some of it very much at a grassroots level, in the same way you see it in India, or you see it here in Europe or in the United States, that young entrepreneurs are engaged around the idea of being entrepreneurial for some kind of social benefit, and I'm seeing evidence of those kinds of organizations bubbling up in China, where there is enormous need, where there's vast swathes of the country which has little access to education or little access to good healthcare, where there are plenty of good things that can be done domestically by people who are so inclined. So that will take a long time to impact at a state level, but it's good to see them.
Right. We'll come back with that theme in 2113, perhaps. How China has adapted. Fredmund?
I am very positive to China. I'm traveling it now since 1998. In China, the first university in the world did integration just a couple of months ago. It is the University of Inner Mongolia. In order to change its structure, it changed its functioning. Inner Mongolia is one of the very strongest provinces, very fast growing, 17% during the last, due to the riches of the rare earths and other things like that. And so 2 years ago, there were 13 presidents from renowned Chinese universities have visited us in St. Gallen in order to learn what we are thinking in my institute about management, holistic thinking, systems thinking, systemic management, and so on. And they were absolutely attentive, and they did something about it. And this President Li, from this Inner Mongolian University of Agriculture, was the very first to take the initiatives, very innovative. He invited the entrepreneurs. This is the province with the largest number of billionaires, and they are, of course, crying for help in management. They have the money, they have the success, but then how do they run their companies? And it's a real joy, it's a real pleasure to work with them. And they are not the only ones. So they are really I mean, not everybody, but you find very open-minded persons, and you find persons, very many, who are thinking about how China can work best, what they are all conscious of, more or less. Not in the private businesses, there's something different. That the Western approach, and in particular, sorry to say so, the Anglo-Saxon approach, there's a difference to Germany, the German-speaking area, you're certainly aware of that, that will not fit China for eternity. So it helped them to break it up, to go a long way, but then they see this will not be the Chinese way to do it. And so they are looking for alternatives and for options, and very eagerly so and very innovatively so.
Let me leap to the third question about Rick's question about the basic workers, or the income inequality question. Do the trends, and I suppose I also mean do the solutions that you've each suggested for tackling, managing complexity, do they go any way to helping alleviate income inequality? I mean, is that going to be a side effect, if you like? It ought to be a main effect of what's done. Umair has chipped in saying, without major rewrites of the social contract, technology and organizations will increase inequality. Does anybody have a counter view to that? I mean, how optimistic are we about the economic effect? John?
As an optimist again, I believe that a lot of the increasing inequality we're seeing right now is actually a function of this disconnect between the institutions that have emerged in all dimensions of our lives, political, educational, commercial, and the world that's changing around us. So I think that is in part a reflection of that disconnect. Just as an optimistic note, I mean, and I don't want to be Pollyannish about this, but one of the statistics I recently saw was a study done in Brazil of the degree of connectivity of the population to the internet. Both do they have connection and the frequency of their interaction with the internet. It turns out in the Brazilian population, the most connected part of the population is in the favelas of Rio. The poorest segments are the most connected segments. Totally counter. And the wealthiest segments are the least connected. So I think we're in the midst, in the actually early stages of a dramatic change where the means for learning become available in a much broader way.
So over time you would see the poorest part, because of those connections, catching up, because they're learning faster than the unconnected.
Catching up. The other piece to the puzzle is, and we're already starting to see this in certain economies, increasing topple rates of those who are at the higher income levels.
Right.
The speed with which people topple out of those levels is dramatically increasing.
Right. I want to come to the tools question. It goes, I think, straight to Tim, because you started your slides with a primitive tool. Obviously, nobody's going to get anywhere with a stone axe these days, or not much further than security, at any rate. How likely is it that one can reassure people and say there are things that you already know that you can draw on to deal with this rather frightening new world?
Before I answer that, I would just add to the education question, which I think that I do concern myself with the problem that the piece of society that's getting left behind fastest is the one which the least change is happening with regard to the type of educational opportunity they have. And so I can't help but think that unless we redesign the educational experience for many of these people, some of it will come through increased connectivity, some of it will come in completely emergent ways, in the ways that people like Sugatra Mitra are talking about. Some of it will become through actually redesigning the way we do elementary school, middle school, and high school. But without that, then I actually do believe that we're likely to see ever-increasing wealth gaps. And so it's the reason, in my opinion, why education should be at the very top of the list of big global challenges that Don was talking about this morning. I think with regard to tools, existing tools, when it comes to change, the tools that I see being most valuable for most organizations, to be honest, are less skills as they are things like strong kind of creation myths for the organization, sense of purpose that comes from going back to why did this organization or institution form in the first place?
Right.
Why was there a need for it? Is there some meaning still in that need, and can we project that into the future, even if it means we have to reorient ourselves around that sense of meaning?
Right.
That I see as being a very valuable tool that one can, and then if one looks at many of the most resilient organizations, they are ones that seem to be able to keep that sense of purpose that often stretches way back through many iterations. I mean, look at organizations like IBM, which, to be honest, have got the same sense of purpose they had 5 iterations ago as a business, before they even started getting into computers. And so I think there's some evidence that is one of the more valuable tools.
Yes.
that we can reach back.
There's definitely a proliferation of black and white photos of people with large moustaches on the About My Company page.
Yes, the company museum starts looking more valuable again instead of a relic,
right?
Perhaps.
Fredmund, any thoughts on that particular issue or the previous one?
Are you still on the disequality of income? Or?
If you want to talk on that, then please.
Well, unless there will not be a deflationary depression, which is very easily possible if we do not take care, then I think we are at the end of this growing disequality. Because one is about to learn that a money-driven economy only will not work. And this is what has been born with the book of Alfred Rappaport, with the shareholder value. He meant it well, but it was executed wrongly. And this is now what is part of this financial crisis. And I'm all for shareholders, I'm all for shareholder values, but companies must not be managed according to monetary measures only. And this is a lesson which some people have difficulties to grasp and to accept. But it will come out anyway. So if there would be a deflationary depression, I mean, then we have social chaos. And how the world would look then, I would not even like to envision.
Yeah.
Because it would be rather worldwide, etc., etc., etc. But there is still many possibilities to avoid it. And in particular, if we move organizations fast enough and controlled enough, this I do not mean in a rational way according to some criteria of rationality, but in a controlled way so that people learn they want to do it with us. Because, you see, integration is about participation, about collaboration. And as soon as one involves larger numbers of people, there are very many, not all of them, but very many who go with the flow, if it improves their lives too. This equality is, of course, something which is relative, but then as long as we can improve the absolute level of lifestyle, I think one can go a long way in a peaceful, in a harmonious way.
Just throw back in some of the things that Umer is talking about online. I mean, one of them is building into institutions, building institutions that value individual lives rather than just the institution as such. And the other question he's raised, which goes to some of the discussion we've had earlier, is, for this purpose, do we need chief executives? One of the things I noticed is that there are a lot of people with chief in front of their title in the room. Do we need chiefs for this kind of developing world? Tim?
I mean, labels are labels, but I mean, I think there's a sort of a defender of the faith role that still needs strong leadership, even if the faith is one of much more disseminated decision-making, less hierarchical, more interdependent. Even if that's the organization you're looking for, these things don't they don't necessarily naturally happen. There are lots of pressures, perhaps from the market, from customers, whatever it might be, to behave in old ways. And so I think there's a role for leadership, CEO or otherwise, as a sort of defender of the behaviors that you believe the institution needs to uphold.
Right.
And that takes, it may not need authority, but it needs large levels of influence.
Right, this curation point that Don brought out this morning, I think is interesting on that. Let's just see whether we can squeeze in a couple more questions. Yes, the gentleman standing there with the mic.
My name is Franz Narada, Global Villages Lab, Vienna, Austria. And I was very fascinated by two observations. The one is that in the 21st century, we're really entering a society of distributed creation. And the other one is, indeed, networking is reaching out to the poor. Now, could it be that one of the biggest challenge of complexity, and I would like to define complexity as a partial decoupling and yet being connected. So we have new rules of the game, and yet we have one world that has to act in a kind of coordination. One result could be that all these people that you defined as left back and down on the social scale, left out of economic progress, they have a new option. And the new option is to care for themselves with the help of advanced technologies that allow them to reach a new degree of self-sustaining, self-subsistence environment. And this is a global agenda. Many people who are left out theoretically have the tools today. There could be solar power villages in Africa where people are just collecting firewood today. They just need a little bit of technology to harness the endless energy around them. So resources is not the problem is technology. And one of the ideas is to connect the business world, to connect the world that is monetized and that is based on the principles of income to a world that is emerging, that is based on the principle of cooperation and mutual support. What do you think are the perspectives of such a new social contracts between entirely different cultures that are just emerging?
Okay, thank you. Want to like to take one or two from up on the balcony? There's somebody there on that side. Don't lean over.
Hello. Hi, my name is Calvin. I'm a designer from Singapore. So I have a question about the issue of time. And increasingly we're able to put out ideas and test out ideas, products out there, constantly evolve and change from it. So the process of change is faster and nimbler. But at the same time, there are still projects out there that are typically a very long-drawn process, let's say building a new city. So which normally takes like years or even decades to see the results. So my question is it possible to allow experimentation and evolution for a very long-drawn process or long-drawn project? Thank you.
Yeah, very good question. Any more on the balcony? Just take one more. If somebody's, yes, the front here.
Hello, I'm Shrey Goyal.
Sorry, where are you? I can't.
On your right, to the balcony.
Right at this end.
Hello.
Ah, okay.
By the light.
So there's a very exciting discussion going on Twitter right now with Umair on the issue of Ask JPM. And Ask JPM has been interpreted as a social media disaster and a PR failure by much of the mainstream media. So when will when will this be addressed as a moral failure, and how will corporations look beyond PR? We're looking to address social media as a medium for understanding their role in society and society's reaction to them.
So your question is, how will it be addressed? Why is it not being addressed as a moral question?
Yes, so currently social media is being seen as a platform just for PR, just for spreading out your word and improving your image. But Ask JPM proves that PR is also a medium by which people can express their views on you. People can PR efforts can fire back. So when will corporations realize this and also see to it that they maintain their image? How can social media play a policing role of sorts?
Okay, all right, we'll try and take that in as well. I think we've sort of answered the social contract question in some of the previous discussions, so if I'll just leave that one in case we have time at the end. But this question about the process of change and whether in building something very complex and long-term, the rapid evolution concept works as well. You obviously do need some blueprints for a city. I mean, just to put that to Tim first.
I think the difference is that those same iterations used to take place. They just took place in secret, and they took place. Amongst with a conversation of a very small number of urban planners, or before that, powerful individuals. But it still took a long time for cities to evolve. I mean, all cities took a long time to evolve. What we have the opportunity now is to do that much more publicly, much more transparently, and have many more people contribute to that creative process, which I think has the potential to result in more robust, resilient, appropriate solutions.
But it doesn't just result in a more complex discussion that never ends and therefore never arrives at building the city.
If it's only a discussion, perhaps, but I don't believe that it has to be only a discussion. I believe it can actually be a participative design process where people actually either take responsibility for their own local neighborhoods, as is happening in a number of kind of urban movements around the world, or because there's an opportunity for the real kind of users of the system to make it clear what their needs actually are, rather than them being supposed by some sort of rather detached set of planners, which is what has happened, certainly in the 20th century view of city design.
Right. Fredmund, thoughts on that particular one?
If the gentleman meant by a social contract what the idea of Jean-Jacques Rousseau, I do not know. I would say no. Those times are gone, and they will never come up again. And they should not, in my opinion, because today we have, from social media to the conventional media up to syntegration, now the means, in particular with the syntegration, to enable people to self-organize, in a meaningful way. And as soon as they have it, I will tell an example from school children just in a minute. And I have experimented with cities here in this province of Lower Austria, with some of the cities saving them from or improving their financial situation. And in such applying integration, the political opposition, as it worked before, was no longer important, because people did not really care about this politically, whether the world is red or green or black or whatever it is. That doesn't make any sense to, in particular, the young generation. They want to have better solutions, you see? And as soon as they have the tools to get a better solution, all those other things are no longer, I mean, I would not say they go away, but they lose their importance and their relevance. They are looking for better solutions. And if we can give them the means to look for that, they will make their own social contracts in their microcosm, of course. See, it's not the macro structure, but that's enough to go on.
I'm going to have to, sorry, Fred, I'm going to have to squeeze in the final question. Just going to try and reframe the one from the balcony briefly, which is, as a complexity problem, companies are essentially, like the JP Morgan question, looking at some of these complex issues, moral issues, for example, as, in this case, a social media question. It's about marketing, it's about how we, rather than addressing the big questions. I mean, is this going to be a continuing problem? People, sort of the distraction of the complex world allows people to, John, I just wanted to put that to you. Does it allow people to dodge the main issue?
Well, I'm not sure dodging the main issue. I think certainly to the extent companies have embraced social media, it's remarkable how much it's been externally facing with customers as opposed to internally helping to mobilize and motivate workers within. One quick anecdote. There's a company in Silicon Valley, I won't name it because it's a guilty party, that implemented a very robust social media platform within the company. And one of the things that surfaced in that social media platform was the deep morale issue throughout the company. Everybody was not trusting the leadership, the management. And the answer of the company was to shut down the social media platform. I think that illustrates in a very pithy way the challenge that we have.
Great. Well, we're going to have to wind up. There's plenty of time to talk to our panelists in person and to Umair on Twitter. Let me just say thank you for a most stimulating panel and your excellent questions. Our panelists, thank you.